This is It's Not in the Syllabus podcast, the how-tos of a student beyond classroom walls. This is the podcast where you, yes you, get to learn what they don't teach you at school and ace that test called life, or at least get a passing grade and get by. It's Not in the Syllabus is a podcast brought to you by the Adventist International Institute of Advanced Studies, together with the Student Association, where we feature stories by the students and for the students. Join us as we discover life lessons you'll surely need.
Welcome to another episode of It's Not in the Syllabus. We are in episode 22 and today we are going to talk about the concept of being called to work in the mission. So this month we are going to focus on mission, and then today with me I have the privilege to have Dr. Bergland. Welcome, Doc. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you
good,
for
good.
inviting.
Thank you. So allow me to briefly introduce Dr. Bergland. He hails from the country of Norway, correct? That is in Europe. And he has a PhD in Old Testament. Let me briefly read the title of his dissertation because I believe it's an interesting one. It's Exploring the Composition of the Pentateuch at Andrews University. Is that the one?
No, that's a project.
That's the project. So, now, the thesis has some words that I may not very clearly
reading as a disclosure of the thoughts of the heart.
Yes, disclosure of the thoughts of hearts. And there is something others of it. How do you say that?
Oh, yeah, that's the publisher.
That's the publisher. Yep. Okay, good. So he also has an MA in History of Ideas at the University of Oslo. Oslo. So thank you for accepting this invitation.
Thank you for inviting.
And then today we are going to discuss about the concept of being called to work in a mission field. I want to begin with our conversation with this idea that when did you feel it was the right moment that God was calling you to become a missionary or a pastor?
Oh, well, maybe I should say that I grew up as a pastor's kid.
Oh, wow.
So if it was one thing I didn't want to become, it was a pastor. It's typical.
May I know why?
Well, in a way, you see the lifestyle and you see that it's sort of demanding.
Right.
And it's not always easy. And so and so it wasn't something that really tempted me as a young. But then I think sort of I ended up also in this spiritual crisis for my own part, and I was seeking going to different places, and I found this one place that Francis Schaeffer. He was sort of a evangelical thinker, and he established these different places in Europe where you could come in peace just to reflect and talk to people. And this was really a blessing for my part in that. And so I got a burden. So I call it a burden at that point for doing something similar to other young people that were also searching. So I had this burden, and then it's a long story, but then I came into this situation, or I would even say God created a situation where I basically felt that now He's really calling me to become a pastor. I didn't want to, but I didn't dare say no.
Wow.
At that point. So, and this was also exactly to work for young people, so this burden that I'd been having. So it was a sort of a long story, but sort of I had the burden, and God created, I think, a situation where I just basically felt I couldn't say no.
Wow, wonderful. Well, I'm interested in the long story, but we begin with the idea of after you have accepted. Of course, there's the process of going to college or to take theology, for instance. So, tell us, where did you do your bachelor's and up to your doctoral level, which we mentioned about, which is Andrews University. But briefly, let's just hear that trajectory, how you move forward.
Because again, I didn't have a plan to become a pastor. So my plan was to become a historian of ideas, or work with philosophy.
All right.
So, but in order to get a background, I thought it was maybe a good idea to study some theology, both to get a better basis in the Bible and also Adventist thinking. So I went to Newbold College and did my bachelor at Newbold College, but as a stepping stone for history of ideas.
All right.
So I basically just finished my studies in history of ideas, master's. And it was at that point that sort of I was pursuing different job alternatives. And basically within 1 week, I got a decline on all the other options, except the church approaching me at the same time, asking if I could become a pastor. So to me, it was sort of weird circumstances also, because in a way I was a likely candidate for the others. But it ended up with a no.
The doors were being closed.
The doors were being closed. And then, so I think sort of God was just using this burden I was having as sort of the entry wedge sort of to get me into ministry, knowing that it wasn't really what I desired. But at that point, sort of, I just felt, well, if this is what he's calling me to,
I'll just go.
Yeah.
And then how long you've been as a district pastor, and then you moved to for advanced studies, which in Andrews?
Yes, so I worked 7 years as a pastor first. And then at that point, again, I just had a bachelor, so I felt I need more studies. And to me, it has always been very interesting to go between philosophy and the Bible, biblical texts. So sort of a pendulum between the two. So I felt, well, now I've been working a lot with philosophy. Now I need to spend more time with the biblical texts again. So that was the background for then pursuing more studies. And for my part, this question, sort of how should we live, or the ethical question has been sort of the key. This was what I was working on in philosophy. And so when I was entering biblical studies again, that became sort of the core theme also, sort of how do we actually approach biblical ethics and the text as a normative text for us today.
Wow. So, I actually like the biblical ethics. I mean, I have many questions, but maybe we create a podcast for that. You mentioned a little bit of the challenges that you face. For instance, you did not desire to become a pastor, for instance, but you applied for jobs that those jobs has been closed. Maybe you would like to know. I'm also not a pastor's kid, but I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist. My family is all Adventist. I know there are challenges in the ministry. So, for instance, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced? I'll not say present, but past. Some of the challenges that you have faced, and you say, okay, because we want to be real with people who are out there watching us, their challenges. So, what were some of your challenges?
Well, I think maybe sort of it comes down to one challenge.
All right.
And it's the human challenge.
Okay, maybe we need to unpack a little bit.
So, of course, as a pastor, it's easy sometimes to get frustrated with the church. It's sort of you see, well, we really need to move forward, and things are complicated.
Definitely.
With people. But then, of course, also you realize that the major challenge is yourself, not the others.
Interesting. I like that.
And I think sort of for my part, one thing I think God has been trying to teach me along in ministry is that I'm a person that can have sort of very clear ideas about and how we should go about. And I like sort of strategic thinking. But then I realized that, well, one of the things I really need to learn is more openness. Because I think many of the challenges we have in church and the human challenge comes down to our ideas. We have ideas about how things should be. And we lock ourselves into these ideas while God might have very different plans.
All right.
And so our ideas become a hindrance from moving forward. And it's at least as much my ideas as the ideas of others.
Right.
So sort of this more openness, I think, has been sort of one of the major challenges for my part to be more open to the surprises of God.
All right.
And how he might lead in ways that are totally different from how we think about church and how things should be.
You know, one of the things that I've been talking to a couple of friends, and this is an elder of a congregation. He was saying, well, why is it pastors have difficulties in listening to other people? So now you mentioned that not all, by the way, not all pastors. Now you mentioned that one of the hindrances that you found, one of the difficulties that you found is to be open to other people's ideas. How is it?
Or I was to be open to God's idea.
God's idea.
But also, of course, others' ideas. Because I think God uses others to speak to us as well. And I think sort of you come in a position, maybe sort of going back to being a pastor's kid, where you're sort of a public figure and a private figure.
Yes.
And sort of this struggle also and being authentic in both arenas, because I think we have these ideas about how a pastor should be.
Yeah, how we should
be. The congregation has an expectation how the pastor should be, how the pastor's family should be, and then being sort of more, and that's sort of something that can easily lock you into a position as well. And I think sort of, so as a community of believers, we need to help each other to be more open, sort of this mutual openness to God actually being our leader and the one that really should set the agenda for how we move forward. So.
You know, as I listen to you, there's so many questions that I have in mind. But certainly when we talk about being called to serve in the mission field, we just don't look at the challenges. There are also benefits that it comes along. In fact, when you go to the Gospel of Matthew, the disciple have asked, we have left our family members, so what is there for us? So what are some of the benefits that comes along when we serve in a mission field?
Yeah, and again, I think sort of it's maybe related to what we talked about. Sort of is this my experience that sort of when I see how God has been calling to different tasks, I didn't plan these. And so it just suddenly comes out of nowhere. Something entirely new.
Okay.
And so as an individual, you're placed into entirely new situations, giving you new perspectives on life, reality, other people. And I think sort of if I would just have followed my ideas and my plans, looking back now, I think it would have been a much poorer life.
Wow.
Poor life experience.
Not financially.
No, but sort of experientially. I would have not been able to see life from these different perspectives. So I think one of the real benefits is this sort of being placed as a fish sort of out of the water. And you learn the dependence on God. You see your own limitations. You see that life, this world, reality is so much, much more than you perceived originally. So, so I think sort of maybe I would say that's one of the real benefits of ministry, that you are changing a lot yourself through ministry, and sort of and seeing that God can use you in ways that you were not expecting.
Wonderful.
So,
I would like to move a little bit on the concept of financial, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for one to work in a mission field. It's been seen, perhaps I will talk about my context, where I come from, that when one finishes theology, there's possibility that is going to be employed, and actually there is assurance of job, which when one has a job, one has financial decisions to have. But we also see that some people are moving away from the so-called pastoral or mission work because of money wise. Or they claim that, well, the church is not paying well.
Yeah.
The church doesn't, if you work for the church, you are working basically as a missionary, voluntary, but you have the basic means. Is it wrong? This is coming from the business mindset. Is it wrong that for us to increase, if possible,
To
increase the salaries of our mission workers? Because most of that I know are leaving because of financial aspect. So is it okay, in your own view, that has nothing to do with the policies, but what do you think that we should do better to attract individuals to work for the church? I mean, Seventh-day Adventists who have finished with an Adventist church schools, but they're saying, no, I want to work out there because at the end of the day I need to pay my tuition fee, my children tuition fee. I need to pay for the mortgage. I need to pay so many things. But when I see the salary that you guys are offering me, well, it's not much.
Yeah, and of course, I don't know much about the situation around the world.
Yes.
But I've understood that it's a lot of variation.
All right.
In how pastors are, sort of policies and salaries. Some places it's a very good salary. Other places is not a good salary. And so I think sort of maybe it's two principles from the church side. And I would say that this is the church responsibility.
All right.
To sort of the principle of worker is worth his wages.
Yes.
It is a moral, spiritual responsibility of the church to treat their workers in a fair way.
Yes.
So this is sort of on the administration.
Yes.
This is just something they have to secure. From the perspective of the worker, I must say that sort of in Norway we have the idea that we should be close to the salary of our educational level.
Okay.
But we are also a little bit below.
All right.
And I think it's something healthy about that. Not much below, but a little bit below, as a signal that it's not financial that is our motivation. I think sort of somebody entering the ministry primarily for financial purposes should find another work. So it's this sort of balance. I think sort of we should have a decent and fair salary, but salary and finances should never be a motivation
the primary purpose
for why we're involved
in the ministry
in this. And of course we know the downsides. Sort of financial things, finances have been mistreated as well. And I think sort of it's this: if finances become a key thing, then maybe it's good to find something else to do. But at the same time, it is important that we as a church treat our workers in a fair way, not exploiting workers. And so that they can provide for their families. And that's, I think, the system that we developed as a church to sort of in the early pioneer era, to really take care of the workers as well. So I think it's this balance we need to find on.
Wow.
So
one of the things that I agree, and many of the things that I agree, is that money should not be the primary purpose of your decision to join the ministry. I hope at home you guys are following that. But at the end of the day, I also have duties, responsibilities to fulfill as a family man. So I do agree that it shouldn't be the main purpose. But according to what literature suggests, now individuals are inclined to work in a place where there's flexibility, where there's conducive working environment, where there's good relationship between supervisors and co-workers. As we're coming close to this conversation, how do you see the future of this church when it comes to mission. I say this because you mentioned in the beginning that you've been working, you had desire to work for young people. Do you see them as getting involved in this mission? If yes, if no, what should be done?
That's a huge question. Yes, of course, I do see that young people are getting involved, but also I think going back to this openness.
Yes.
Because maybe as a church we've developed into traditions of how pastoral ministry, evangelism should be done, and I think sort of my hopes is very much in the young generation.
Definitely.
Because I think we need them at this point to be thoroughly rooted in the Word and really know the Word,
Yes.
but also know thoroughly the culture in which they're working.
Wow.
Because I think we have this tendency nowadays, maybe, to have one way of evangelism that we should do all over the place.
Which is?
I think often it is a sort of Western type of evangelistic, and maybe sort of sometimes a bit older way of doing it.
Okay.
And I see from my context working in a very secular country, I think we need to do some serious thinking about how do we communicate the word faithfully in such a secular society.
Definitely.
But I think the same challenge goes for an Asian context where we are in.
Yeah.
Do serious thinking, sort of how do we help people express faith in a way that really feels domestic, to use that.
Yes.
In an African setting, how can we help people really express their faithfulness and loyalty to God in a way that resonates more with who they are and their culture? Because I think sort of, I've been talking, of course we have a very international environment here, and just talking to how things are done around the world, I just see that often sort of we sent out missionaries and God bless them. They did their best. But also I see that it was a tendency to project one way of doing it.
Yes.
And I think this is the challenge that the young people need to take on, to, again, really know the word profoundly.
All right.
And ask the question, how do we, in an authentic way, really communicate it to the culture in which we are?
Well, so. I wish we could have a part 2 of this podcast, but just because there are so many things that you have unpacked in these last questions, which I believe it needs more to discuss. But if you have to give an advice to someone who is out there, who is contemplating to become a mission worker, we say a pastor, what advice will you give him or her?
Yeah. I think sort of it would, again, go back to some of what we've been saying. Sort of pray hard and serious.
Pray hard and serious.
About for God to really show you in a way that you understand where He is leading you.
Definitely.
Into it. Sort of, we have a lot of ideas about what a pastor and ministry should be and are. But I think sort of God is calling each of us individually to specific tasks that is a need of in the work.
Yes.
And so again, this openness to God possibly placing you very different from what you were imagining,
expecting,
and being open to them.
Definitely. So, wow, I don't know about you, but we just had an amazing conversation. The concept of being called to serve in the mission field with Dr. Bergland. Dr. Bergland, just a way of closing, is there anything you would like to share with us and with our audience out at home of this idea of the concept of being called to serve in a mission as we going to wrap up this segment?
Beyond what I've said, it's... No, I think just sort of when you wake up in the morning, you see the normal life around you. But wake up and see that it's a spiritual dimension that we're living in, and it's so much more, so richer than what we can see and hear.
Yes.
And get accustomed to living in that dimension of your life.
Wow. Profound, very profound. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for discussing this idea of the concept of being called to work in the mission field. We have learned that if you really want to get into the ministry, make sure you have understood God's direction and you pray hard, and make sure that monetary desire should not be your primary purpose when you join the ministry. We hope to see you next time in our episode 23. Until then, God bless you. Bye-bye.